cross-cutting with any transformation is education. So we want to bring up some of our leading thinkers and practitioners to talk about their ideas as far as the reimagining of education. Our moderator is Janet Haven from Data and Society. She's joined by Emily Ford from Columbia's Engineering Outreach, Chelsey Roebuck from Elite Education, Crystal Bonds, who runs the school at City College, and then Sheila Borges, who's from, well, she was with NYU, which is where we know her from. She's now an independent consulting in the STEM space. Would everyone please come up now? Let's give them a round of applause.
Can you all hear me? Yes, okay, well, welcome to our panel on Reimagining Education. I'm Janet Haven, I'm the Executive Director of Data and Society Research Institute, and thank you, Bruce, for the introduction. I'll just run through again. We are joined today by Principal Crystal Bonds from the High School for Math, Science, and Engineering, by Dr. Sheila Borges Rajguru, who is an executive consultant and came from NYU also, by Emily Ford, who is the Director for Outreach and Special Projects at Columbia Engineering, and by Chelsey Roebuck, the Executive Director and co-founder of Elite, which is a emerging leaders in technology and engineering. And so we're talking today about the idea of reimagining education and what that means alongside the implications of data-centric technologies and the emergence of technology in schools and the need for technology training to prepare our students for the future workforce. And I think what we're all seeing, we had a great conversation yesterday with this group, what we're all seeing is that educational institutions are changing because of technology. We're seeing a bunch of broad shifts underway right now. We're seeing shifts in the balance between formal and informal education, between student-driven and teacher-driven education. We're seeing a focus on increasingly personalized learning practices, and in some cases, data-driven learning practices. We're seeing an increased need for computer science and STEM teachers at all levels, and a real gap in how we find those teachers. And of course, across all of these areas, we see a need to center equity and to think about how these needs play out in a range of different environments. So I'd like to turn to our panelists, and Principal Bonds, maybe I will start with you. You know, I think as we think about this backdrop of the changing environment that education is happening in and that educational institutions are existing in, I'd love to hear from you, and I'm gonna ask each of our panelists to talk a little bit about this. What you see as the intersection of opportunity and urgency when it comes to the ways that technology is entering into education. Okay. Sheila.
Okay. Can everyone hear? Oh, yes, you can. Good afternoon, everyone. Like they mentioned, I've worked at Columbia University and NYU providing pre-service teacher education and professional development for teachers. And so what I've seen in the space that I'm in terms of preparing people who want to become teachers and also providing professional development to teachers. And that could be also in the space of teachers who've been working for a while, and also career changers that are alternative teachers that come in and they get professional development while they're in schools. is that when we introduce technology, and I'll use robotics for an example because I've done a lot of research in robotics education, is that just because we introduce robotics or a tool into a classroom doesn't necessarily mean that it's minds-on. It doesn't necessarily mean that students and the teachers are teaching it in a way that could be very innovative and transformative for children, and that children are interfacing with the technology in a way that they're learning. So that's number one. It's the preparation of ensuring that teachers get the preparation that they need in order to be able to teach minds-on in the classroom. And then just in general, in terms of the work that I do, is, and I'm just going to echo the work from Professor Leon Walls from the University of Vermont, is that in order to recruit and retain diverse teachers, we really need to look at it from a societal perspective, that we tend to not live together as people, and we tend to not learn together. And because of that, we tend not to love together. And so when we're talking about providing professional development for teachers and for children, all children, to really learn and become the next engineers, the next technologists, we really need to focus on desegregating and really teaching our teachers to really give the love aspect also, not just the STEM and then engineering and the math that they teach in the classroom, but that human aspect of really loving children and encouraging them and being caring. If you talk to, children in New York City and you ask them what makes a great teacher, they will say lots of things, but a lot of them will say a loving, caring teacher.
Great, thank you. Principal Bond.
Just want to make sure I'm answering the question because I was completely distracted.
Sure. So the question was, what is it that you see that is right in front of us, that's at the intersection of opportunity and urgency as we grapple with the idea of how technology is a part of education and how we should be reimagining education given those opportunities?
Well, in this technologically driven world, I believe that we should make sure we are not only teaching students how to use technology, but making it available and making sure that they have not only access to it, but when they need it, they know how to use it and they know what to, what to get when they are, whether it's a project or just that they know how to get it, they know how to use it, and they know how to access it. I agree with my colleague speaking about the teachers. We have our teaching practices are we not only hire pedagogues and people who have great pedagogy and teachers, but also industry professionals. And so what happens is that our students learn how to learn what it's like for a day in the life of a fill in the blank. We have 6 engineers, architects, actuaries, financial planners, and CFOs. Industry career changers, and having the teachers who have the ability and the content knowledge to go deeper into the technology, doing project-based learning, letting them understand and simulate real projects that are happening in the country and in the world is definitely very important. And we've also found that sometimes when we purchase new technology, we put it in front of the students, and they are so progressive, and they just want to learn, and we give them a project and then just leave it out. And sometimes even for after-school projects. So it's giving them the access, giving them the love of learning, making sure that they have fun with doing it, and making it also, some of the classes are compulsory. So some people have to opt into advanced placement or opt into a technology or computer science. But what we do is we make sure that every student has to take these advanced placement courses, and we not only make sure that they have to take it, but we give them enough support to make sure they're successful with it, because our intent is, of course, for them to learn. So we make sure that they have the support that they need to do it. So exposing them to the technology, making sure they have the tools to actually utilize it properly, making sure you have the teachers in front who have the background to teach the students as well.
Emily, would you like to,
Sure.
to talk about that a little bit in the context of your work?
Yeah, so the intersection of urgency and the intersection of opportunity and urgency.
Yeah.
So if I look around who is in STEM in higher education, I see a room that looks very different than the one that we're in here at this event. I think the real opportunity is not just access to technology, but access to learning opportunities in technology, not using technology to learn, but to learn how to make it, learn to study it, and learn to create new technology that is inclusive. And what we need to do in order to make that possible is create inclusive learning environments in STEM. And I think that is really where the greatest opportunity lies for us, is that there is so much tech that's being developed, it's developing at such a fast pace. There's so much potential. We can probably not even imagine, I'll speak for myself, I cannot even imagine what technology holds. So we need to tap into all of the minds, all of the creative minds, all of the young minds, everybody's minds, to really maximize that potential. But we need to create an inclusive learning environment so that we have people from all backgrounds creating the technology that we'll all use, that will make all of our lives better.
Thank you. Thanks. Chelsey, how would you come at this question?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting thing to sort of reflect on opportunity versus urgency, and then technology and education, because technology is one industry that's probably the fastest developing in the entire world, and education, as we've seen not just in the States but globally, moves very, very slowly. And in fact, in many places, we're still learning the same ways we did even 100 years ago or more. I think that the urgency on the education side is getting more bright minds to rethink the learning experience for students. I know my colleagues spoke a little bit about education being segregated at times, both with access to opportunity, but also in subject matter. And when we think about integrating technology into education, technology should be viewed as a tool that's transdisciplinary, that goes across the different disciplines to enhance what's already happening. But fixing education is, my background is in mechanical engineering, and I've been an engineer working in education for the last 10 years. I'll say that education is probably the hardest job that anyone can have, is being a teacher. And it is a real profession that takes years to master and perfect. I think one of the challenges with designing educational solutions or technological solutions for education is that engineers aren't always sitting at the table with teachers and educators, and don't necessarily have that perspective to design the tools that are going to advance education more quickly. So in thinking about this opportunity versus urgency thing, I think we really do need to find more people whose minds were trained to think like an engineer, who can sit at the table with educators and try to design these solutions to be more impactful.
Thanks. So all of you, this has been really interesting to kind of go down the line and hear you talk about this. All of you talked much more about the people who are part of this equation, the students and the teachers and the people that we want to draw into this field, than about the technology itself. And so another question I'd like to pose to all of you, and happy to have anybody jump in, is technology the solution we should be talking about? Are we having the wrong conversation when we talk about technology? And if so, what is the right conversation? What's the frame that we should bring to this? Principal Bonds.
I think it's dovetailed because we need to prepare our young people to be analytical thinkers because the technology is changing so rapidly. If you're teaching them about one particular device, well, it'll be antiquated not too long after. So it's about the technology, but it's also about how we have a growth mindset, that we want them to have a growth mindset to learn, to analyze things. But it's also about the technology because statistics will show if you, the STEM jobs are, I don't know why this mic keeps doing that. The STEM jobs are outpacing the non-STEM jobs, at least, I don't want to say like at least 2/3 more. So, and I looked at some other statistics recently, and I can't remember the source, but it's saying like in 2020, there'll be like over 1 million STEM jobs and not enough people to fulfill these jobs. So what are we doing to make sure that we are preparing our young people for this technologically driven world? So can we look at just the technology? No, but do we need to look at the technology? Absolutely, and pair it in tandem with people who are in that industry and exposing the students. And the statistics say if you don't have a parent in STEM or research, if you do have a parent in STEM or research, you're twice as likely to go into that field. But if you don't, how are we exposing these kids to it? So there's so much untapped talent that's not being challenged or being given because some schools are so underperforming, they are focused on the ELA and the math, and they don't feel like they have the time to do the other, which they call extra, which technology is no longer extra. It is needed. It should be a part of what we do.
Yeah, I'd like to just speak to what you were saying, Crystal, about we definitely need to teach computational thinking and technology in schools, specifically in preparing teachers to be able to do so earlier, right? So we have a lot of teachers preparing for STEM in middle school, especially high school, because a lot of them are subject experts in STEM in high school and middle school. But when it comes to K-5, the phenomenon that happens in elementary school is that teachers are usually generalists, so they don't have a STEM background. And so the science and math and technology that they're teaching students is not enough. And so then when students get into middle schools, especially these very underperforming schools, they get confronted with very hard STEM, and then they say, I'm not a STEM person. STEM is not for me. And then also the language that sometimes educators enact in a classroom, the verbal and nonverbal language sometimes alienates students into STEM as well. And so I think that for me, in terms of how to revolutionize and how to enhance STEM education really comes into play, and having really good pre-service, which means how do we prepare teachers, and having really good professional development programs that Columbia University has, NYU, Mercy College, CUNY's, where they go out there and they have teachers come in, work with engineers, and then teachers get to learn robotics, teachers get to learn wireless technology, wireless communication, and then they learn and they prepare these beautiful lessons to then be able to go into the classroom and teach kids, right? Because a teacher that was prepared 15 years ago and is teaching right now, that teacher did not get the pre-service education to teach for today. And so professional development, building relationships, collaborating with higher education, with consulting firms, etc., really becomes a partnership, a really good partnership, to be able to support teachers that ultimately our kids will get access to this great technological advancements and being able to be prepared for the next jobs, essentially.
Yeah, just to build on what's been said, I agree that the conversation dovetails. I don't think you can isolate technology out of, from education. I don't think they should be separate conversations. And to me, I see it as a pipeline issue. I mean, it's all part of a continuum. Teachers are a really critical part of it. I see it through the lens of inclusion, really, is that we can prepare teachers and we can prepare kids, but are we creating an environment where young women want to pursue STEM, or where they're welcome, or where their perspective is as valuable as their male colleagues, their male counterparts.
Can you say more? How do we do that?
That's the conversation I think we should be having. That's my answer to your question, is what conversation should we be having? Well, that's the one I think we should be having. What can we be doing, each of us, in all of our positions, but everybody in the event here today? What can each of us be doing to make this a more inclusive environment? I mean, I think this event is a really great example of what we can be doing. But I think there are things that each of us can be doing to make tech at large, STEM at large, a more inclusive space.
Chelsey, you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, so I think to piggyback off of Principal Bonds, I think technology is really about increasing equity or access within education. And so there's a few really great examples, like Khan Academy putting free SAT prep on their website, which then I think it's something like 6 to 8 hours of total SAT prep on Khan Academy will get you a 90 to 100% score increase. So in places where you have public school students who maybe can't afford private tutoring the way that their affluent peers are, it helps to decrease that gap in just preparation and putting together these rigorous portfolios. I think also using technology to be able to scale best practices that maybe there's small nonprofits or organizations that have developed really innovative models, and being able to leverage technology or some web-based tool helps to get that into the hands of students around the country, around the world, almost overnight.
Can you talk a little bit about like an example of where you've seen that happen really successfully, that you were?
I mean, I think Khan Academy is an incredible example. And it's interesting because that's not necessarily tech education. They have computer science and other things, but it's cross-disciplinary. On the computer science side, I think Code.org has done a really thoughtful and intentional job about increasing access to computer science. So when you look at statistics for STEM and the number of students that are taking AP computer science in high school, those numbers have doubled, tripled, quadrupled in the last few years. And there are increases in underrepresented populations, students of color, young women, having opportunities to take those classes and ultimately doing well. The students that we work with are, I think, as talented as any students in the world, but for many years they don't have the opportunity to continue their education at places like Columbia, partially because these are students that got off track as early as 4th or 5th grade. And unfortunately, the way our education system works, if students are not on track by 8th grade, it's really, really difficult for them to pursue normal pathways into rigorous science and engineering. So that's a lot of the work that we do with my organization, Elite, is not just providing access to courses and curricula and teacher PD, but also spending a lot of time and energy educating students and parents and families so that they can be advocates as well, and to help control those pathways for the students.
Great. Well, that's a great segue into my next question, which is going back to the idea of the technology, the pipeline that we want to pull students into and through, and the idea of inclusion. You've answered this question really eloquently. I'm curious to hear from others on the panel. What's really hindering us? What is preventing the pipeline, the technology pipeline, from bringing more students into STEM careers or into STEM training?
I think there's a myriad of reasons, right? There's so many. When I think about historically disadvantaged neighborhoods, since the 1930s, you put the zoning maps, and it's still a lot of the same neighborhoods who were historically disadvantaged, right? So those same neighborhoods, we can do Harlem, Bed-Stuy, South Jamaica, they are still trailing others. And the need to put, what's fair is not equal. So everyone shouldn't get the same amount of everything because the needs are so different. And I also think that oftentimes we have programs or initiatives, and some of them are like sprinkled around neighborhoods. But I do believe geographically, a child's demography shouldn't be their destiny. So if we were to come together, let's say, and put something, I don't know if you adopt a district, right? Something, but surround a particular geographic area and say, let's do something together to move the needle. And what happens is that everyone's working to do the same thing, but it's like everyone's up like this right here, right? But we're not connecting it. It's like everyone's just kind of, the companies are trying to find a school and the school's trying to find a company. The companies need them to pay and the schools sometimes don't have the money. They don't have the capacity to do it. And the school's capacity is a huge thing. They want to do it. They don't have the capacity. They may not have the skill set. They may not have the network. They may not have the people in their building. There's so many other things that are preventing or the unsaids that we just don't know. And in the theoretical, the companies are coming in and saying, we have this great program, but you have to do it in A, B, and C. Well, we only have professional development on Mondays. Or teachers don't want to stay after because they have childcare. There's so many things that theoretically make sense, but in reality in the school, it just doesn't work. But if we can come together and talk about that, and we can do our pipeline from K, there needs to be a pipeline. At 8th grade, it shows if you're off track, 3rd grade. 3rd grade is a predictor of who won't graduate. There's so much that needs to be discussed and talked about among all constituents, right? Including legislators. Maybe it's some policy. I'm not really sure, but it needs to be more of a conversation, more intentional, more deliberate, and I'm thinking geographically as well.
Yeah.
To jump on that, I really agree with talking to each other, having different people talk to each other, having engineers talk to teachers, like Chelsey said, and listening. Because
Amen.
there's a lot of talking that's happening.
No action.
I don't know how much listening is happening, and I know that there's not that much action either. So I see a lot of disconnects, and I think it's those. It's not necessarily blocks. It's gaps. And I think open conversations where people both talk and listen, and then can act together, can help close some of those gaps.
And I just want to say, in terms of, we throw the words diversity and inclusion around, and to some of us that may mean different things. And so I think that also really thinking about, what does inclusion really mean? And what does it really look like, right? Because what inclusion means to me might mean something different to other people's. And our priorities are different because of our lived experiences, right? So I think having honest conversations that make us uncomfortable with people who look and speak and come from different areas that look different from us is very, very important. And it really goes back to when children don't have certain experiences or certain social capital, right? People in their lives that are STEM professionals. And the first professional they see is a pediatrician, right? Their pediatrician, or a teacher. That teacher makes a remarkable impact in that child's life, and that impact can be positive or it can be negative. And so preparing and having these hard conversations when we're preparing teachers and when we are discussing in a medium like this in terms of what does diversity mean to you, what does inclusivity really mean to you, and how can we have these very meaningful conversations with action items, with very good action items. So, and I'll just give one example, tangible example, when I go into schools and I'm preparing teachers on how to be inclusive, we sit down and we listen to what the students are saying. We do these co-generated dialogues where we sit down and the students talk about their experiences in the classroom, and they will tell you the verbal and nonverbal language that the teacher's doing that alienate them in the classroom and also alienate them from the teacher and alienates them from STEM. And so And then the listening part, the teacher has to be open to listen also. And I think that's also an example for all of us also, to have these dialogues, not just discussions, right? Discussions are, I talk and then you talk, but having a real dialogue where somebody speaks, you listen, you reflect, and you speak, you kind of converse back and forth with what that person is saying, not discussions where the person is speaking to us and trying to connect with us, and already we know what we're going to say when that person stops speaking. That's not a dialogue, right? So like learning how to have meaningful dialogues with each other where we listen and we meditate and we reflect, and really learning not to have our ego so invested in what we think is right. So I think, these are all nuances in terms of how do we really build relationships and how we really connect with students and how we prepare teachers to be able to teach students.
Great. Chelsey?
So I do think that in order for change to be sustainable, there needs to be a significant emphasis on building capacity. And I think the best way to do that in communities like the one that we're in is to create localized communal spaces where students can pursue whatever pathway they choose within their neighborhood. I think so much of, there's so much research about perception and when you look at underrepresentation in STEM or even of young women in STEM, a lot of it has to do with being able to have positive role models or people that can light the runway for these students to take off. One really interesting example, we do a lot of work internationally as well, and for our summer camp in Ghana 5 years ago, there's a question on the application that asked students one person they look up to, and 70% of the students this 1 year wrote Dr. Ben Carson. It took a little bit of research to realize that they had shown a movie about Ben Carson in all of the schools in Ghana. And male, female, it didn't matter. This is what everyone wanted to do. And so one of the ways that we were able to get more students into engineering as opposed to medicine was to rebrand the program for a year as a biomedical engineering camp. Students were still doing electrical engineering and designing devices for the human body. They'd look at pressure and flow rates through pipes and compare that to veins and arteries. But just this little perception tweak was enough to capitalize on what students were excited about and then introduce them into non-traditional pathways in engineering.
That's a great story. That's a terrific story. So I think we'd like to take a few minutes at the end of the panel to open it up to questions from the audience. But before we do that, I just want to do one more quick round with our panelists. I think, in this group that we have with us, in the audience, we have community activists, we have educators, we have parents, we have people from all different places. I'm sure we have technologists, and I'd love to hear from our panelists just very quickly. What do you want this audience to take away? What is the call to action that you'd like everybody in this room to walk out with as we have a collective challenge to face? So we're getting a short time thing, so we have to do it quickly. Chelsey, do you want to go first?
So, and I'm not sure the demographic or professional experience of the audience, but what I will say to every audience that I speak with is that we all need to be involved and invested in education. And I think being able to bring our collective minds, experience, and expertise together is the fastest way to scale change.
I think diversity in STEM is a really big issue, but I think inclusivity is a very individual thing. So my call to action is to have everyone in the audience, to reflect on who's in the room, where are they, every room that you're in, and think if there's something that you can do to make it a more inclusive environment, whether it's STEM, whether it's not. To really see your individual role in contributing to an inclusive environment, regardless of where that is.
Sheila.
I think, Emily, you articulated that great. So I think I'm just going to say, ditto to Emily, what she just said, and then just kind of also reflect on who you are, right? Because so many biases that we have of others is that we don't reflect who we are and why we think the way that we think. So in order to really be inclusive, we need to think about, where did I come from? Why do I believe in this? And also, why did that person say something that hurt my feelings? Reflect on those feelings, reflect on where you come from, reflect on the differences of others. And I think that then we can get to a place where we can start becoming more inclusive.
Thank you. Principal Borges.
I think our young people, they don't even know what they don't know. They may have an idea that they'd like to be a doctor or lawyer. Those are, more traditional. Some don't even know what an engineer does or can do, or the different levels. And it's so technology. But I think that my call to action would just be to connect with a school in some sort of way, at any level, a K through 12. And either volunteer to be either a mentor to someone, or join if you're in an organization, I'm sure, to go into schools and to find a way to connect, because again, the principals do want and need, but they just don't have the capacity to seek. And mentoring, we underestimate what a mentor can do for a young person, to expose them, because while they're growing up, they're building their own personal board of directors, a teacher, or a supporter, their cheerleader, their seasoned, I don't know. There's so many different things that they can get. So connecting with the young person, whether it's in the school, in the family, anywhere, to say, this is what it's like for a day in the life of a fill in the blank, because they may think they want to do that, but when they really see what it's like, maybe or maybe not. So I think connecting with young people and being mentors, or going into schools and just sharing your love of what you do, to maybe, that would spark an interest for them to want to pursue a particular career, a different career.
Thank you. Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And I'm trying to see, do we have time for a few questions, or are we out of time? 2 questions. Okay. Yes.
There's a microphone, but I just want to say, Chelsey, you're right. Educators have probably the hardest job on the planet. You guys are like the army, boots on the ground, first people into the infantry, that's dealing with children and also adults that need to be retrained. As Industry 4.0 changes the game on all of us faster than we can imagine. So you're all having like the toughest job. So other comments being made, you're right. Everybody needs to come together on this, because it's too much for you all to handle by yourselves to figure this out. But we're going to have to get a grip on what's changing, how fast it's changing. I'm hearing buzz that in 20 years, educators don't know what the job market will look like because of Industry 4.0, and digitalization, automation, and everything. So that's my final question really is, what are you hearing? What are you dealing with in terms of that 20-year picture and this crisis that we're seeing in the job market 20 years ago?
So I think, are you suggesting that teachers won't be needed because people will learn through technology, or?
That we don't even know what people are going to be doing for a living in 20 years in terms of the jobs today that will be transitioned to digitalized tasks by robots and machines.
So I think,
So how do you know what to teach now to prepare us 20 years from now?
I think that's why engineering is so important, because it just teaches you how to think and solve problems. And ultimately, every year, every new technology, every company uses their own version or flavor of a language or a framework. So it doesn't necessarily matter what language or what specific skills students are learning. I think what's most important is how students are learning and that they learn how to think. I always tell our students it's less important, they're moving into a generation where what you know is less important and how quickly you can find the answer is so much more important.
Amen.
Amen. One more question. Oh, back there.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Hey everyone, my name is Emil. I actually work over at the Columbia University Tutoring and Learning Center. So we always deal with a lot with technology and with tutoring as well. You guys bring up a good point with how can we measure the key performance values of our students? Like, it's not always about what they need to learn, but how. Because recently I noticed that all the times it was always about, especially in New York, it's always about test scores. It's about their Regents exams. But that's not exactly what we want to teach them. We want to teach them like how to value actually learning. So my question is, how do we measure how they're learning as opposed to what they're learning?
I don't think there's any easy answer to that. One measure that I use is students' interest, their enthusiasm, their curiosity, whether they're excited to learn or not. And I don't think our classrooms are necessarily doing the best job of that. And I think that's where a lot of our programs come in, is providing those opportunities, the opportunities to spark some of that interest and bring some of that joy in learning back.
Yeah, and then also having partnerships with institutions that, for example, will teach kids not only how to build a robot, for example, but how do you make a prototype and market it to solve a community problem. And so that gives them those thinking skills, and at the end of a particular program of that nature, they actually have a physical component and all these skill sets about business and marketing and prototype making, design canvas, in order to be able to develop those critical thinking skills, but also think like an entrepreneur, right? You're using the technology, you're learning how to code, but you're also thinking like an entrepreneur. So just having relationships with institutions and other organizations and individuals that can really bring that into the classroom.
I think it's both.
Absolutely.
I think it's both. I do believe that the world, we're judged on how we do on exam scores. I'm the principal of a specialized high school. Yeah, there's SATs. So you are judged by that. So that's a pressure that our students have. However, those who don't do as well on those exams, or those who do well, say, I'm more than that exam. So we have to teach them how to do well, because of course that's how the world measures us. But we also have to teach them the love of learning and to be lifelong learners. And they have that excitement to want to learn. Oftentimes we'll have students who behave in a particular way, and sometimes that's just a smokescreen to say, I don't know how to do this, so if I just mess up everyone else from doing that, then we won't get through to what we need to get to. It's also sometimes a smokescreen for teachers who say, oh, I'm not a math person, but instead of like helping them to get, because they have to teach this math, I'm not that real math teacher, I just have this, I'll just do algebra 1. No, we have to get over those things and those fears, because we don't know it. So teaching the teachers, but also the excitement, I agree. The excitement for learning, wanting to do something different, and exposing them to it, because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, they don't know what they don't know, but if you expose them to something and let them get an excitement about learning something different, that's how we measure. We measure from their willingness to do more, their willingness to go out and learn more, their willingness to want to participate, and their excitement to bring others on and to teach others. So there's those qualitative, the conversations. What are their conversations? What is the dialogue that they're having? Are they challenging themselves or challenging others? So it's we have very progressive youth who want to do that. So it's the test in addition to their behavior and their behavioral patterns, and putting them in spaces where they have other people to learn from.
I think your question is exactly why we need more people with non-traditional backgrounds getting into education, why we should all be teachers. I think I definitely understand why testing is so important as a benchmark for being able to identify what schools are not high performing, and the majority of the schools that are lower performing on test scores also are doing a lot of other things that maybe are not right. I think the challenging thing is being able to get more people with these non-traditional backgrounds into a room, to get psychologists with computer scientists, for example, to be able to work together to design tools to measure things like interest or grit or growth mindset, all of the indicators that psychologists think are necessary in order for success, sustained success in science and engineering or any other discipline. So, I mean, I think the answer is to maybe figure out a way that we can all just have the conversation and design those tools that don't yet exist.
I'd like to add that another practice that we have, I had mentioned earlier, was hiring former industry people, career changers, because they're still there by that craft. And the dialogue that happens with someone who studied English or who studied math, along with someone who was was a practicing engineer or an architect, and coming together, it's amazing. The thing is that transitioning from the career path, I think that we need to figure out a way to make it easier for career changers to get into the Department of Education. I had a teacher who was an MD, PhD, and I told them I think he had a better chance of seeing the Dalai Lama than getting and finishing to try to get a New York State certification. It's not as easy, and then the salary structure is very different from industry people, so that's why we have a lot of hesitancy about career changers wanting to come into the industry and or have the conversation. So there are a lot of different things that we can do, or like I said, I don't know if it's policy changes or just, I have no clue. I mean, I do, but you know, but yes, so that's some other practices, but it would be great to get everyone in the room. But when it does happen, it's awesome.
All right. Thank you all so much. It was a great conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Education. Did you know Crystal was once the principal of the year in New York City? Crystal Bonds.